Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to Byron K. Ward presents Business Leadership with Action. And we're thrilled to bring exemplary business leaders to share their life's journey with our audience. Most of these stories are from men and women of color, and especially highlighting examples of business excellence from African Americans. So sit back and enjoy today's positive story of success, leadership, money, and inspiration. I am very excited to host this exclusive interview with Mr. Melvin L. Flowers. Mr. Flowers is with us today representing three organizations. Now, this brother serves on two high-level corporate boards of directors, and he is also on a top-level college board of trustees. So he's with organizations that are some of the largest in the world. He's with HSBC North America and Broadridge for his corporate roles, and he is also on the board of trustees of Seattle University. He is sharing some of his time with us, and he's currently in Seattle today. So we appreciate having you on board, Mr. Melvin Flowers.
Glad to be here, Brian.
Well, good. Well,
yeah.
How's it going in Seattle today?
It's going pretty well. The sun just broke through, so that's probably a good sign for our discussion. And I've had a great day so far, and just looking forward to having a nice chat with you.
Yeah, likewise. And I am really looking forward to you sharing your life's journey with us. So maybe we can start, if you could just tell us a little bit about your childhood and where you grew up, and if there were any business inclinations early in your life.
Yeah. So, I grew up in the south suburbs of Chicago. We were a poor working family, a poor working household is the way I'll describe it. Didn't know we were poor at the time. I didn't know we were poor. We just getting along like everybody else. My father was a steel mill worker, and my mother did domestic work. For those of you who may not be familiar with that term, domestic work is a fancy way of saying she cleaned other people's houses, mostly those of doctors and lawyers. But they made a great home, had a great, happy childhood. My focus was clear from my parents, was to be on education, because they wanted me to have a better life than them, or at least have an opportunity to participate in the American dream, which was, some things were changing I was born in the early 50s. In the early 50s and 60s, there appeared to be some opportunities that were opening up based on hard work of a lot of people fighting for our rights. But I would say, from the business side, our communities at that time, everybody lived in the same community, because you couldn't live in other communities. You had redlining and segregation and all that stuff. So the community I grew up in was primarily a poor working class community. But we also had doctors and lawyers and teachers who lived in that same community. So from a business perspective, I would say the only professionals I was exposed to at an early age that gave me some desire to go to school and become a business professional were insurance salespeople, funeral directors. I wasn't a professional, so doctors and lawyers were off the table, and teachers. But I would say the insurance people and funeral directors were the two that I saw the most of. And I almost became a funeral director.
Interesting. So what about your siblings? Did you?
Yeah, my siblings, I had half siblings. My father was married twice, and I had two older sisters and a brother. The closest to me in age was 10 years. So I was kind of the little snot-nosed problem kid. My brother was 10 years older than me, and he would occasionally take me out and spend some time. My two sisters were mostly like aunts or
Wow.
second mothers, and they were often got married at fairly early, so they didn't spend a ton of time other than going to visit them as married. Yeah.
Okay. Any sports? Any highlights during your school years up through high
Yeah,
school?
yeah. In school, I tried to play all the sports like everybody else, but to be perfectly honest, I wasn't the best at sports, even though I played with some great athletes and on some great teams. So I played baseball first. I played basketball. Through junior high school, I played some basketball. In high school, I guess the sport I was most successful at was wrestling. So I wrestled some in high school. But the thing I was really involved in from grade school through the first couple of years of college was music. And I grew up playing woodwind instruments, primarily tenor saxophone.
Okay. Do you still play?
I still have my tenor sax. To say I play would be a stretch. Uh, I still love music. It's still in my bones. It's the thing I thought I would do. But I got some opportunities early in life to play in some bands, play with some real professional musicians. Had a couple of big gigs, and saw how hard it was, and the fact that you had to be both really good and really lucky turned me to go another way.
Well, obviously you had some chops to play with that kind of talent, folks that were playing professionally.
Yeah, I think in the '60s and '70s, a lot of there were a lot. That was the age of bands. If you just go back through, you had, the Ohio Players. You had James Brown. You had Earth, Wind, and Fire come out of Chicago. You had Slave. I mean, so bands were all over the place, and not only the ones that came out, there were a lot of us, and a lot of the entertainment venues had live music. So in junior high school, I joined the Professional Musicians Union. And if you're a professional musician, me and my band would get gigs. And that would often lead us to play backup for other groups. So I've had the opportunity to play backup for the Dells. For a while, I played backup for Johnny Taylor on his Who's Making Love tour while I was in the Chicago area. I won a junior high school contest and got to play one gig with James Brown and his band at the Regal Theater.
Wow.
I played frequently opposite the Jackson Five in talent shows and in at this club called the Grapevine. The Five Stair Steps, we played frequently with them. We were all about the same age, growing up at the same time. And so I got to see a lot of good musicians, good shows. Muddy Waters, I played a lot at his White Rose place. So it was kind of interesting time.
Yeah, no doubt. See, you're revealing a part of your background that I'm sure a lot of people were not aware of unless they were your hometown folks.
Yeah, but a lot of doing that, it was a lot of fun. But it was clear to me when it came time to graduate from high school that I had a couple of scholarships to go to music. One to Grambling University in Louisiana, and even when I went to Northern, they offered me a partial scholarship in music. But by then, I had determined that, wow, I may be good or okay in music, but this is a hard life to make money unless you're great.
Mm-hmm.
And I wasn't great.
Well, smart man.
Yeah.
So you mentioned Northern Illinois University.
Yes.
You had a partial music scholarship, but you majored in accounting.
Yes. Yes. I mean, I actually they offered me the partial music, and I turned it down so I could major in accounting. And I worked at a couple of factories in high school and getting ready for Northern. And so I'd saved up some money and paid partially my education. I did get some scholarships and grants, but I ended up majoring in accounting. Didn't know that's what I was going to major in. Actually, when I went there, I thought I was going to major in business and become either an insurance man or a funeral director or some type of businessman.
Okay, that early influence.
That early
Yeah.
influence. And it was during my first semester at Northern taking an introductory to accounting class. I had a associate professor who was African American, and he said, "Look, you seem to be pretty good at this accounting stuff. You should check it out and major in accounting." And I'm like, "Oh, sure, I want to be an accountant. That's not very cool." He said, "No, you should be an accountant." And so he showed me all these books that showed how much accountants made, and he was comparing them to salaries of other professions, and everything he showed me, the accountants made more than everybody else. He just didn't show me all the books. He didn't show me what sales and marketing and engineering was making.
Mm-hmm.
But anyway, I focused in on accounting pretty early while I was at college,
And obviously, you were a pretty good student. You didn't mention about your grades in high school, but obviously, you got some scholarships and.
yeah, I was a pretty good student for sure through junior high school and through my first year of high school. And within my first year of high school, my mom came down with cancer and she eventually died my sophomore year. So my sophomore year was kind of a down year. I don't know if I was going through some mental things or some family things, but I picked it back up my junior and senior year. So I was a pretty good student then. But up until then, I was pretty good student, focused. Probably like most other people, kind of torn between. Do you want to be a really, really good student and considered an egghead or a square? Or how do you keep a little cool? And that's where the sax helped. That's where I started playing. I mean, playing a little music helped with the coolness part. And, it was one of those things that in our neighborhood, if you wanted to have any luck in the real social part of life, you didn't want to be known as too much of an egghead.
Right, right. Well,
Yeah.
you stayed with that, and in college, sounds like the accounting curriculum agreed with you.
Yeah, so to my surprise, accounting at Northern Illinois was one of their top programs. In fact, the people who wrote most of the accounting books, Kiso, Hendrickson, Delaney at the time, and Kiso's books are still very popular, were professors at Northern. And that was just luck. I didn't know that. I didn't choose Northern because I knew it. But anyway, getting through their program, which was pretty challenging, really prepared me quite a bit for life after coming out. In fact, it helped position me to be recruited by some pretty interesting companies. But it was a tough, the program was tough. I enjoyed it because it was more competitive. It was a place I could compete. And stuck it through, got through in about 3.5 years.
Are there any highlights that come to mind during your college experience?
I don't know. I think when I think about me in college, a couple of things that I really focused on. Early on, I made a decision that in order for me to have any type of social life, I had to get my work done first. So I had this rule that I would study all during the week and I could party as hard as I wanted to on the weekend, up until I would cut myself off at 6 o'clock on Sunday.
Okay.
And I kept that rule. It was one of the few things I kept for a long period. For 4 years, I kept that. So I would have lots of friends who would come up, and during the week, they want to have bidwist parties or go do whatever. And I was like, nope, not during the week. Call me on Friday, I'm good. So I kept that kind of thing. That was probably the key to my success. I would also say that I was very fortunate that I met some great people. In fact, I met a person who I'd consider one of my best friends the very first day at college. And he happened also be someone who was focused on graduating. So that helped. And then finally, I think the just the fact that I left the neighborhood that I grew up in, and college was about 90 miles away, so it wasn't that far, but it was far enough away for me to focus on something different. And so, and it was far enough away for me to see that there was a different life you can live. Because at college, at least at the college I went to, I was able to see really clearly for the first time that I really was poor. It's one thing when you live in a neighborhood and everybody else has about the same amount of resources as you do. It's another thing when you go to this other neighborhood and you don't have nearly the resources that they
see the other side of life.
Yeah, so
Okay.
those are all good learning experiences.
Okay, that it sounds like it. And let's take a pause there, get yourself a drink of water, and I want to remind our listeners that you're listening to Byron K. Ward Presents Business Leadership with Action. And our show is produced and underwritten by Action Human Technologies, LLC. Our program is broadcast live from the studios of 99.3 FM KJBU in Oxnard, California. And we're streaming live on 99threefm.com. We're also available on demand at 99threefm on audio and on video at byronkward.com. You can find us at LinkedIn, byronkward.com, Instagram, Byron K. Ward, and Twitter at Byron K. Ward, also on Facebook at Byron K. Ward. And we're here with our special guest and a very accomplished person with a exemplary corporate history, and he's none other than Melvin Flowers. We're about to hear Melvin give us a little bit of his work history. He went to Northern Illinois University, and he had several job options. So what was first, Melvin?
Yeah, so I would say, upon graduation, being recruited I graduated in 1975. It wasn't that hot of a job market that year, but I ended up with a company called Square D, an internal audit, which wasn't something I really had thought about, but it was a great opportunity as it turned out. The guy who hired me, Dick Dowd, I was very fortunate to be hired by him in that he actually cared and put some investment and time and energy into my success. So Square D was in the northwest suburbs of Chicago. Very interesting change for me because the first day of work, they told me to show up with a suitcase. I show up and they give me a plane ticket to Atlanta, Georgia, and an advance check. And they take me to the airport and off I go. And so with no training, didn't even know if I had a seat in the building, I'm off flying to Atlanta, Georgia to actually learn audit. It was, and by the way, that was my very first airplane trip. I had never been on a plane. I told you, coming from a working poor family, I had never been on an airplane. My aunts were very proud of the fact that I was getting ready to travel. So in getting me prepared, they had taken out their best, what I'll call train luggage. So they had this big luggage that they take on these train trips, packed me all up, and I show up at the airport with these big pieces of fancy older train luggage. And when the guys that I was going to work with picked me up in Atlanta, they were asking me, what the heck is this stuff? We got to take you and get some new luggage, some airplane luggage.
Wow.
So that was a learning experience. A kind of embarrassing moment, but worked through that. So showed up, began to learn the ropes of what it took to both be a professional internal auditor, also what it took to travel. as a professional.
Right.
So all this stuff was cold. So it was kind of interesting, period. And probably my biggest lessons at the time was how did you dress? Uh, so if you go back to my history, I had grown up in an area where what you saw was insurance men and funeral directors and church people, and we learned how to dress a certain way for church and church gear, and we were pretty fly and pretty sharp. And I show up at this company that was, you know, their dress gear was more conservative. They were wearing Brooks Brothers suits and these ties and these crazy looking loafer shoes and stuff. And I'm out here with, you know, fancy colored shoes. I'll never forget the first professional interview I went on. I had a pair of green platform shoes matched with green socks and a green shirt and a sharp green suit. And the guy it was at Harris National Bank asked me, wasn't I a little bright for an interview at a bank?
Right.
So I had to learn a whole new culture and a whole new way of dressing. And I had this stubbornness in me because I just refused to buy them Brooks Brothers suits. I just thought they were dead ugly. Mm-hmm. And if I would have showed up in my neighborhood with one of those suits, I would have been laughed out of town.
So you were high fashion rather than GQ.
Well, I was trying to be. But one guy, we had another African-American that worked at the company. He said, look, you don't have to wear that Brooks Brothers stuff. So he turned me on the Hart Schaffner marks, which was kind of conservative, but had a little style to it.
Yes.
So I finally was able to, after I got my first paycheck, go out and get a couple of those suits, and I was better off.
Okay.
It was okay.
Okay.
Yeah.
Now, Melvin, we're starting at the beginning, but mm-hmm. I want to make sure you're retired now.
Yes.
And your last position was at one of the biggest companies in the world. Tell us about your job at Microsoft.
Yeah, I retired a little over 2 years ago, barely over 2 years ago from Microsoft. I was a corporate vice president there, and my responsibilities, I ran the enterprise risk management program and internal audit for Microsoft. So I ended up working at Microsoft roughly about 17 years. I was a corporate VP there roughly 11 or 12 of those 17 years. Very proud of that. I learned a ton. I was probably the only corporate VP, African-American corporate VP at Microsoft the first 5 or 6 years that I had been named corporate VP. I wasn't the first, but there had been a few others. But at the time I got promoted to corporate VP, there was one other lady, and she eventually left. So there was about a 5 or 6 year period that I was the only African-American corporate VP, which was both, for me, it was both a blessing and a curse in a way, because for the first time, not the first time, but one of the first times I really had to figure out how to be a corporate leader on the corporate side, but then also be a leader for a group of people who looked to me to help them figure their way through a corporation and what was going on and right. So I would get calls frequently from other African Americans who had issues, challenges, questions. And so it was a great learning, a great opportunity for me to utilize a lot of my leadership learnings on how do you lead organizations within an organization. I became the corporate sponsor for BAM, Blacks at Microsoft, for a while. I did a lot of corporate sponsorship for a group we called FAME, Finance African Americans at Microsoft, where the job was to both recruit, acclimate, and help other African Americans be successful in that environment.
What would you say is I usually ask this a little later during the interview, but from that experience, what is the single biggest thing you learned that you think our audience would like to hear?
Yeah, so the great thing about working at Microsoft and being in those experiences, I would say the thing I learned that was most important to me was that to be successful, you had to be a constant learner. And that it was more important to listen and learn than it was to uh, talk and to direct. And that was such a learning for me because I had always dreamt that if you were a businessman or a leader of an organization, it was your job to set up an organization and direct and give people orders. And what I learned, both on the business side and particularly on the mentoring and the assist side, was that you were much more effective if you became an intense and a good learner. And you, once you fully understood something, you put yourself in a, and you learn new things. You continue to put yourself in a better position to help others and to accomplish goals. So I think, and then the other thing I found out that as you move up the ladder, success can't be defined by what you achieve personally. You should define it by something broader. And how do you bring up either your full team or a group of people that you're involved with or influenced by? So it really made me think about success differently, approaches differently, and what was important in life differently.
That's outstanding. Thanks for sharing that.
Yeah.
You were at the top of corporate America in one of the top organizations in corporate America. So you've reached the stage where you retire, and you don't just retire, you join the boards of two major corporations and the board of trustees for a major university. Tell us a little bit about your two corporate board positions initially.
Yeah. So the thinking behind that was that I was just graduating to a new phase of life. So I had this learning life in school, and I had this learning life where you worked as an individual contributor. Then I had this life where you're a manager and or a leader within a corporate situation. So now I was going to graduate, and I call myself graduating into the me phase of my life,
Okay.
which we call retirement. I call it the we phase.
Okay.
And my goal for that was I wanted to enjoy life and enjoy some of the things I had earned and accomplished, but I wanted to extend that phase as long as possible. And after doing a lot of reading and watching a lot of people, the things I saw in common were you have to continue to use your brain, you have to continue to exercise, and then you have to find some things that you love to do so you can enjoy and have fun. And so to me, to continue to use my brain, the board service came up as, okay, here's a way I can stay involved, stay challenged, and continue to learn, but yet contribute to both companies and to others. And from the board, you can contribute, to diversity and inclusion. You can set policies that help continue the struggle within corporate America or to make things easier or right. So that was the piece of joining the board. I purposely set out and said I wanted to do some public board work. I had done some charity board work, but I wanted to do both public and charity board work to give back.
Now, share for our listeners how that works. How do the boards find you? Are these board positions paid? How much time do you have to put in?
Yeah. So board positions for public companies in America are really you're a fiduciary or you're responsible to the shareholders of the company for overseeing management, making sure that the governance systems in the corporation are appropriate. And really the job is to make sure that management's doing the right thing to maximize shareholder value. That's really the way it started. Now it includes other things such as you have to make sure that you're serving all the stakeholders like the government, employees, customers, and all those other things. So usually boards are made up of independent directors. Those are people who aren't directly working for the company. So where you get paid for being on a board, you don't get paid a check for being on a board. You get a retainer fee. And yes, I get paid from the two public boards. Uh, one, I get paid roughly 50% in retainer fee cash and 50% in stock.
Okay.
And then the other, I get paid a full cash retainer fee, even though I have to own some stock in it. Um, I work, you end up doing roughly, let's say, scheduled somewhere between 4 to 5 uh, groups of meetings a year. Most meetings last 2 days, some 3, where you have a committee you serve on or a committee meeting day, and then a full board meeting day. Your primary responsibilities are hiring the CEO, making sure that looking over the comp of the CEO and the senior leaders, making sure that the strategy, overseeing the corporate strategy, that is understanding it, contributing to it, those things, making sure that you have the right controls for finance and achieving the corporate strategies, and making sure the company abides by the laws of the country, the state that they're in. So that's where most of the work is.
Yeah. Now, those duties are somewhat similar to your role as a fiduciary in a public company like Microsoft. I mean, we didn't really touch on the aspect of a public company as opposed to some of the companies that were private initially, and you helped to bring them to a public status.
Yeah, I will make a distinction between board and management work. Boards actually, most of their work is done in researching and understanding management reports out to boards, and so they have to read all of those materials, and you have to read and understand the competition and the regulatory environment. And so most of your job is about challenging management and holding management accountable to achieving their goals in a way that is both legal and ethical and integrity. So I'll kind of say that real quickly. I will say, in my career, one of the things I thought that made me better equipped to do board work or governance work was that when I came out of internal audit and then I did some plant controllership roles, I was fortunate enough to be on a team that did a leverage buyout, and I was in Oxnard. I was in Oxnard at the time, working at Gould Incorporated, their medical products group. We bought that. I was part of the team of managers that did a leverage buyout and bought that. I was the controller at the time and eventually became CFO, where we did a private leverage buyout, and then we took that company public. And that would have been in 1987, one of the quickest from a private to public, probably the fastest that had been done at that time. We did it in 7 months. Then we did another secondary. But the reason I could say I was equipped, when you're the controller or CFO of a private company, you do have to think about governance and those things to get through a public offering.
Absolutely. You're the man. And you're the power that you have had in your career is at the highest levels. I mean, your responsibility as a corporate vice president at Microsoft must have been awesome. The audit work you were doing, you're a powerful brother. And then now you've leveraged that into a even more powerful role with these boards you're on.
Yeah, that's interesting. You use that term. And for the young people who are listening, I would probably change that term from impactful to powerful. You do have impact and influence. I don't know if you ever get to power. Power in corporate America is a very dangerous thing. And it's one of the reasons why you have a board of directors, and it's why you have processes and systems, is so that power doesn't get out of hand. But I'll say impactful.
Well, I'll put on my media hat, and you are impactful and powerful.
Okay.
How about that?
All right. But yeah, I really think and that's the way I looked at it. And the way you look at board service, though, you should look at it more like you're a servant. You're serving the needs of the shareholders and your stakeholders. And if you're humble and you approach the job from that standpoint, uh, you're more likely to help the company stay in the right lanes and not run afoul of uh, ethics problems, abuse problems, different problems with them, how you handle your employees, and you're more likely to come up with a company that can meet its objectives and goals.
Okay, now that's a good segue because I do want you to say something about your trustee role at
Yes.
Seattle University. However, you're touching on the next thing I wanted to ask you about, and that would be your leadership philosophy or the foundations that you use to get you from the hood to the highest levels of corporations in the world.
Yeah. So I would say the things that I mentioned one of them earlier, and that's
Also,
listen.
let me interrupt you before you go too far.
Yeah.
Let's state the names of those two corporations.
Okay. So the Broadridge Financial Solutions is um, one of the companies, and the other one is HSBC, the bank, the North America Bank, which is a pretty big international banking company.
And both of
You
these
know,
organizations are over 10,000 employees, billion
yes,
dollar companies, both.
that's correct. That's
Okay.
correct.
Okay.
Yeah, and they're both headquartered in New York. So I fly to New York often out of Seattle.
Okay.
Uh, but anyway, I would say, yeah, I mean, as you learn, you evolve, and as you grow, you evolve, and you learn different leadership skills. But I would say the ones that really, um, the leaders I admire the most, and the one things I learned that I thought helped me the most were, I'll put communications in one bag, but it starts with listening, and then you have to be a really good listener, and then you have to be a really clear and concise communicator. So I would start anybody who's developing a skill set, really focus on being a good listener and a clear and concise communicator. Now, I would say a lot of parents probably would say the same thing. The same thing works in parenting. So that's a skill set you have to have. The second piece for leadership, and parenting is probably the area where you can learn more about leadership than anywhere else, is you have to have high integrity and ethics. And, because people are observing more than they're just listening to you.
Yes.
So if you say something, you better do something. And if you are trying to do something, you better be doing it for the right reasons and the right way. Because if you're willing to take shortcuts, all you do is build into your organization. People will take shortcuts, and they will begin to take more shortcuts because you're teaching them how to go down the wrong way. So the whole thing about holding yourself to high standards and integrity, communicating what you want to do frequently and often and clearly, those are great things. Then I would say being accessible, um, because people, if you, and people do perceive, if you're a corporate VP at Microsoft, people will look at you as a boy, you really rest the top. And you have to be accessible and approachable in a way that they understand that you are human and you can have discussions and you have vulnerabilities and you make mistakes and you correct them like everybody else. So you'll be a much more effective leader if you're accessible, if you're humble, if you're vulnerable and willing to be vulnerable and have those conversations. Because it's in those conversations that you establish the relationships that you need actually when you get in a tough situation to be a leader.
Yeah, I like that, and certainly when I hear that, I think about transparency.
Transparency is absolutely,
Yeah,
and that's
yeah.
part, yeah, yeah. I should have said that right up. Got to be willing to be transparent, answer questions. Uh, but it's kind of interesting. Transparency, people sometimes get confused with telling everything you know. So you have to be transparent about what you're trying to accomplish and what you're doing. But there's always some things that you have to be able to keep confidential. And
Sure, sure. Well, you know, it's your interview, but authentic and
Yes,
forthright. Those are
right.
some of the characteristics that come to my mind that are
That's
tied to
correct.
transparency.
I agree 100% with all of that. But I do want to know that, people really want to trust you. Uh, and so trust comes with both from the fact that you're both transparent and for the fact that if they have a conversation with you, that you have the common sense and the credibility to know, uh, to sort out what should be kept confidential and what can be discussed in other forums.
Okay. Okay. Well, ladies and gentlemen, I want to remind you that you're listening to Business Leadership with Action. And I'm Byron K. Ward, and my guest today is Mr. Melvin L. Flowers. Melvin, you have shared a wealth of information with us up to this point. You have transitioned in the last couple of years to a higher level, although not full time, maybe, but a higher level of responsibility in your career. What's next for you? What's important to you now, and how long are you going to do what you're doing?
Yeah, that's it. So I really haven't established a timeline. The most important thing for me to do is to really enjoy and focus this next stage of my life. And so I am focused on trying to keep healthy, have fun, and continue learning. And probably the other thing, I am doing a lot more work in both giving back to the community and trying to be a participant. And I'll say this at the risk of it being misinterpreted, but really being a participant in society and in our democracy. So I'm dedicating more and more time to trying to establish a better place for those who are coming along behind me, including my daughter and my granddaughter and others. And that includes getting more involved with what's happening in our country in all of the institutions, not only education and business, but the political institutions and other institutions that have an impact on people's lives. So those are the important things. I'd love to be active for a long time. So I'm going to continue to put energy into keeping my brain active, learning, exercise, jazz. I love jazz. I still want to have fun and live life and travel. Those are the things, and golf. We talked a little bit about
So,
golf.
so those are all consistent with your lifelong learning,
Yes,
in my view.
I definitely want to view myself as a lifelong learner and want to continue to do that. And so I am looking for other. I mean, the great thing about music and jazz is it changes all the time, so you're always learning. Uh,
You,
the great thing about golf is that you can never master it, so you always think you're learning.
well, you've been so generous of your time and wisdom with us. What would you say is a single or how could you wrap up any message you would give to our listeners, particularly small business persons, folks that may be looking for advancing their career in a corporate role? You're the top of the spectrum. What can
Yeah,
you leave us with?
yeah. I think the thing I tell people most is you really have to focus on the things that you could change or you can make a difference with. And I find more people get hung up with identifying things that aren't right or aren't working, which is great, and you should do that, and you should bring them up. But if you can't change them, or you don't have a plan to do something to change them, then spending much time there is just spinning your wheels, and it doesn't help you. And so I tell people, really, identify what it is you want to accomplish, identify the things you could do to move you in that direction and focus all your energy there. I mean, the way I answer this question a lot with a lot of the young people that I mentor, I mean, they'll ask me, when you were growing up, did you ever feel like you were held back or discriminated against? And I said, well, I'm sure it happened. There were a few times where I thought about it, but I didn't spend a lot of time and focus and energy there because the one thing I couldn't change was being black. I was black, so I couldn't change that. The only thing I could change was the message or how I delivered it or the impact of the material, or if I was in a position that I thought was not going to be fair to me, I could change either jobs, careers, or do something different. But if I wasn't willing to do something different, then spending a whole bunch of time talking about it was not helpful. So I'll start there. I would say the second thing you can do is limit yourself, because most people unknowingly limit themselves. So when you take time out to plan out your aspirations or what you want to accomplish, don't necessarily put false barriers in front of yourself. I mean, a lot of people will say things like, well, for instance, they don't see how they could raise the funding they need and so they'll stop developing the ideals and presenting them. And I'll tell you that most successful business people will tell you great ideals will eventually get funded if you put the energy in them and you work through it. So don't limit yourself or what you think you can be or what you want to try to be, because most people have far more capabilities than they give themselves credit for. And I would say that. And then I would say, be your best. I would say all the time, and I know that's impossible, but as much as you can, because you never know when somebody's observing you or evaluating you for the next opportunity. And so be at your best in all situations and with whomever you're dealing with. I could tell you that at least one of my promotions in life came because I always treated a particular lady who was in accounts payable well, and she went out of her way to write a recommendation letter for me for a big promotion I was at, and it made the difference between me and another candidate. And she was a person who you would have thought just was, beneath me, her opinion wouldn't have been considered. But I always treated
the
receptionist, the secretaries, or whatever, as well as I treated the CEO. Speak to them, be at your best, treat people the way you want to be treated, and those things come back to you.
Man, those are some powerful words. Yeah, thank you for sharing that. I've got a couple minutes here. I wanted to double back to the Seattle University role.
Yes. Yeah, that one, I had been on the board of Big Brothers Big Sisters. I did 7 years of service on that board and just hired the new CEO. And it was time for me to transition out and put some new blood there. But I always wanted to be in a charity. I was approached by them to lead their audit committee. I actually hadn't thought about moving in that direction, even though I knew I wanted to do a charity. It was a learning opportunity because I didn't know anything about education. It was a learning opportunity because I certainly didn't know anything about private colleges, private Catholic Jesuit colleges. And in case anybody want to ask, I'm neither Catholic or Jesuit, so you could fit in and learn a little bit anywhere. But I thought it was an opportunity because the college had a strategy and a vision and a mission that they wanted to help certain neighborhoods in the Seattle area. And they were out being public about their goals to more than double their minority population at the school, and the same with their faculty and administration. And I said, okay, if this is what they want to do, I can help them. And so when we talked, and I talked to Father Sonberg, we went over what the role would look like. They checked my credentials out at Microsoft and said, yeah, you'll be great on the audit committee. We think you can help. And so far, it's been a great experience. I've learned tons about how public education is funded, how they do admissions. I learned a ton about athletics and violations and all of those things. I've learned a lot about how colleges look at student applicants.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm better equipped now to give advice to students as I talk to them around the community. Sometimes I think back and I say, man, I probably didn't give that student the best advice on how they could both get accepted and get financial aid and those other things. And I actually learned a ton about what colleges and institutions like that can do to better connect with communities and better help communities, the whole community, not just the students, but the whole community. And one of the things we do at Seattle U, we have a program where we actually bring in small businesses and help them with establishing their books, but we use the students to do that. It's a great experience for the students, great experience for the business. The business get a lot of help. They get some tax advice, and they get some contact with professors. It's been a great experience for me. And I don't know if I've ever felt better contributing to an organization than I did to Big Brothers Big Sisters in Seattle U. And that taught me that accomplishing something is a reward within itself, and all rewards don't have to be monetary.
Wow, that's great, man. You have shared with us deeply of your knowledge and your experiences, and very grateful for you taking some time to share with us today. And before we close, you've given us so much wisdom, but is there a favorite book or a favorite saying that you can recommend, or a recent book?
Well, there are a lot of them, but I'll give one that's a quick read. It's called The Growth Mindset. Growth Mindset.
Okay.
By a lady named Carol Nowick, and a lot of people have looked at it, and it's a book I think everybody should read. I know when Microsoft was about to go through its big transformation, we brought in our new CEO, Satya Nadella, and the core that a lot of people don't understand, the core transformation of Microsoft was transforming from being a know-it-all company to a learn-it-all company. And that principle, and how do you think about that, and why it makes you such a more powerful leader or group, comes across pretty clear in this book. And it's about, and it helps you think about how you can learn and be a lifelong learner, and those principles can help you in every phase of life. So I would say that book really, I mean, if you think about it, a lot of people will tell you at Microsoft that book was the kernel of what changed that company from being a company that was not considered one of the big leaders in tech, where the stock price was languishing in the 30s and that kind, to a company who's probably the second most highest valuable company in tech today, with a price that's bumping up against $300.
Yes, sir.
And within a 7-year period. So that book and that kernel of knowledge began the transition of what we had to do.
Thank you so much. He's Melvin L. Flowers, Corporate Board Director for Broadridge Corporation, HSBC North America, and trustee for Seattle University. Thank you again for spending time with us. You're listening to Byron K. Ward Presents Business Leadership with Action, a show that's produced and underwritten by Action Human Technologies, LLC. Our program is broadcast live from the studios of 993 FM KJBU in Oxnard, California, at 9 a.m. Pacific Time, and streaming live on 993fm.com, and also available via audio on demand at 99threfm.com and via video on demand at byronkward.com. We're on social media, LinkedIn, Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook at Byron K. Ward. See you for our next show.